So we had a lot of fun with this topic, induction, scientific reasoning more generally to include abduction. But it is time, at least for now, to wrap it up, to look at what we've discovered and what might be done next if you were developing this. We started with a question, one which has been quite fundamental in the last 100 years of philosophy of science. What connection between an observation and a theory makes that observation evidence for the theory? We also offered very quickly a superficial answer to that question. The superficial answer is to say that the observation features in an abductive or inductive argument for the conclusion that the theory is true. Now this is of course superficial because it really just in a way shifts the question along. Now the question becomes, what's the relation between the premises of an abductive or inductive argument and its conclusion? So what we've really got are just two ways of thinking about the same thing. That's all we've got here. So this was our question. Unusually, we have some results. I say unusually because I think this is very unusual in philosophy, but there are some results and there are some quite good results, and they're not the results that you might have been expecting. So the first thing to note is that our discussion of the relation between observation and theory is something that wasn't at all Hume's concern. Hume actually took for granted that he understood that relation and then went on to offer a kind of sort of sceptical argument. And we haven't engaged with any of that at all. So what we've been looking at is entirely different from Hume's concern. When it comes to the exam and you see a question about induction, please don't think Hume and write about Hume. That's really not our topic. And it won't help you at all to do that because Hume's concerns were quite different. They might be interesting to you in all kinds of ways, and that's fine. It's just that that's a different topic from anything that we've been discussing. And if we're interested in forms of reasoning, induction, abduction and the rest, Hume is not actually that relevant at all anymore. It's good. Okay, the second main result is that we cannot characterise this relation, the relation that holds between an observation and a theory when the observation's evidence for the theory, in purely formal terms. We know that from the discussion of grue and what Nelson Goodman called the new riddle of induction. So that's a nice result for us because it tells us that there's something interesting and deep to say about this relation. We also know that an observation's being evidence for a theory is not just a matter of the observation being an instance of the theory. And that was shown to us by what I called Hempel's ravens or Ayesha's traffic lights. Now at this point you might say, look Steve, this is all looking a bit negative. This is all looking a bit negative. Haven't you got a more positive conclusion for us? And the truth is I have. So the negative stuff's kind of good and interesting because it moves us on, but it's really the positive stuff that's more exciting. And we've seen quite a bit there. So the first thing we found is that whether or not that relation holds between an observation and a theory, when the observation is evidence for the theory, depends on how the observation is made. So it's not a matter just of what you observe and what the theory is, it's also how you arrived at that observation, how you came to make it. And to me that's very counterintuitive and baffling, but I think we've seen a very compelling argument for that to be the case. And we've seen actually that there are two ways in which the relation of evidence depends on how the observation was made. First and more straightforwardly, there must be no bias. There must be no bias. That's how we were able to respond so easily to Goodman's new riddle. It's very easy to say what's wrong with grue inferences. They're inferences which involve a bias in the way that observations are made and selected. Secondly, and this is the more subtle thing, a good procedure must have been followed in making the observation. In particular, you must have been following a procedure that would enable you in principle to confirm or refute the hypothesis. So here's the very striking thing. We've seen that there are two positive things to say about the relation between an observation and a theory when the observation is evidence for the theory, and both of those concern something extrinsic to the observation and theory themselves. They concern how that observation was arrived at. My suspicion is that if we want to go further here, we have to look more at the process of gathering observations in order to confirm or reject theories. We have to look more at the actual scientific practice. And so you will see this is a kind of PS because it's not really essential for you here at all. You'll notice that I followed Godfrey Smith quite closely because, like him, I think that good scientific practice is relevant to philosophical questions about reasoning. The philosophical problems that we have mostly been solved by the practices that have been developed by scientists. But of course, you might have your own ideas, and actually I know you well enough by now to be sure, I won't name any names, but you're pretty much bound to have your own ideas about this. So my challenge to you is to come up with some arguments, pursue a different line here, challenge me on something, show me that I'm wrong to think that the procedure by which an observation is arrived at really matters. What's the best opposing theory? What's the best one that you can find here? If you want to go beyond what we've done just in these lectures, then among other friends, Google Scholar is probably a particularly good one for you. So I'm looking forward to seeing various attempts to refute the line that I've borrowed here from Peter Godfrey Smith in thinking that if we want to understand the relation between a scientific theory and observations that provide evidence for it, then we need to look at how those observations were made. Thank you very much.